have Gabe Marans from Savills, amazing speaker. He also has a great voiceover voice. I think he should do more commercials. Iain Thompson from Office App. They have a huge, huge space in this area. Milos Halecka from MiddleCap. Simon Abboud from Hines. So I'm pretty excited about this panel, to be honest. Where should we get started? Guys, are you here? Can you hear us? Can you see us? Are you
Perfect.
ready?
Thank you very much, Lotte.
Yeah, we can hear you. How do you see that technology is being implemented all over the world to create an optimal service for tenants? Well, Gabe, maybe to start with you from the US.
Yeah, so hey everybody, thanks for being here. Good morning for those in the US. From a high level, I think that the topic of technology is going to be a fascinating one, not because of what has been adopted, but by the recognition across all the different sectors that touch on commercial real estate, that technology will need to be adapted in some regard, either from the standpoint of becoming better and smarter with the building infrastructure, as well as the tenant experience. And one of the big questions that we get at Savills in our practice here in North America, we exclusively represent tenants. We're occupier side tenant reps. And so one of the big questions that we're facing is, in this post-COVID world where hybrid work model seems to be the rule, the office will play a central role, but it will be used fewer than 5 days a week. How do you use technology to bridge that experience for the occupants, both from the employer standpoint and the landlord and developer standpoint? And so we're starting to see some degree of technology being advanced, but there's a long way to go. But it all comes down to that user experience and having it be as seamless as possible while also being eco-friendly and intelligent.
Yeah, Iain, how do you reflect on that?
Yeah, I would very much agree. It's
sometimes we have an echo. I don't know why the echo is here. Is everybody on mute?
I don't think this will work.
If you don't speak, you put yourself.
This better?
That will help probably.
Excellent. So I definitely agree with what Gabe said. At Office App, we see, and really, unfortunately, I think we need to go a little bit deeper. Even it's quite agnostic and at quite an individual level how technology has to be brought in, and being able to connect all the pieces of all the wishes or most of the wishes of tenants. Connected to landlords to then have the right kind of, let's say, human-centric output of how assets, how sites, the workspace is being used is only just beginning. We're seeing quite an acceleration after COVID, but it's so different. And now it's all about availability and collaboration, but also a lot of mobility coming in all of a sudden as well. And yeah, how is this going to be connected, and how can the different technologies in the different countries, on the different continents, make sure that there's data being pushed out of that is more or less equal to be able to use. So it's going to be, in the next years are going to be extremely interesting.
Milos, what about you? You guys work together with Office App, I know, in Southworks. How do you see this being implemented right now?
Well, oops, there's the echo again. Well, I would see it maybe from even broader perspective, because what the pandemic did and still does is catalyzing the whole progress of how do we look at our work and our workspace. And I always like the concept of Harvard Business School professor Clayton Christensen talking about a job to be done. So we do not buy products just to have them, but these products play a role to help us to get the job we need to do to be done. And the same applies, I think, to real estate and our tenants, which we probably should call customers. Thanks to the changed situation and the lockdowns, the companies started to think about how should we get our jobs to be done in these completely changed environments and conditions. And now we see the echo of this thinking in the real estate. So the space is not just a place where I put my employees under one roof and let them do something. It has to help the job of their employees to be done. Meaning, when we start with a healthy environment, with sharing the data, with amenities, they help them to be engaged in the work and so on and so on. So I think that we see a complete paradigm shift here. And even when I spend my whole life in technology, I'm not a proponent of having technology like, touching you everywhere and ask you for interacting with it. I think it should be the supporting factor in everything you do. So my ideal of technology used in real estate is a technology which knows everything about the space. It's able to provide insights for people to help them decide, and not to be invasive. So, and when you divide this into concrete technologies, there are lots of them, but I think the health it's the primary one at this moment.
Okay, and Simon, how do you create these hybrid environments?
Right. So I think one of the to echo what the guys have mentioned earlier, what's quite important for us is how to be first ready with the infrastructure. Obviously, there is a lot of tech out there, sometimes a lot of noise, and it might be a bit difficult to make the sense, but I think integration is going to be the key to everything. You have apps like Office apps, it's all about integrating. And to go back to what Gabe mentioned is how can you integrate all those different service providers in order to create some kind of a seamless, in our case, Hines experience, which is constant throughout the different assets and the different locations. So I think this is something that I think developers and landlords mostly needs to definitely not underestimate the power of having an innovation strategy, because we've been hearing a lot of landlords that have been started with COVID and implemented a few things, and after a year, well, unfortunately, it's not really helping, and therefore, this is money that unfortunately has been thrown out the door. So the impact of piloting is really key here, in order to really understand what the pilot needs, what the customer needs, in order to offer that experience.
I think it's an interesting idea that what everybody has talked about, and I think that the example that would bring it all together is let's talk about when tenants are touring spaces to further lease. And what had happened pre-pandemic almost across the globe was maybe there would be some photos, maybe there would be a floor plan. You certainly didn't have any filming or virtual tour capabilities. And so the pandemic accelerated that from a technology standpoint. And yes, it's the leading edge of the spear in terms of that tenant experience, but it captures the technology and it captures everything that will be downstream from that experience. And so there was this rush to get virtual tours filmed. And one of the technology pieces that we use and continue to use quite heavily is Matterport, which creates a 3D image of the floor plan. The challenge with that is, as great of a tool as Matterport is, it is not intuitive, nor does it replicate the experience of walking through a space. And so there's going to be a learning experience, and the learning experience that we're undergoing right now is that Matterport is a great thing to have, but you still need that video. You still need that moving image in order to replicate that same experience of walking through a space. And so we have this point of friction between theory and practice. And because we haven't really been back in the office setting, it's hard to marry that practice with that theory, which is why the next few months are going to be wildly fascinating to see what individual cultures, businesses, cities, companies do.
So how do we create that hybrid environment now that I'm dreaming and putting it together? And maybe the other option is, we're talking about these technologies that we're bringing into the space. What technologies should the building bring in? What technologies should the tenants or the individuals bring into the building?
I'll take a first stab at it. I'll look at it from the perspective of the tenant and defer to the rest of the gentlemen to espouse a little bit more on the landlord perspective. But it comes down to something that I want to be careful in terms of how I frame it. Community is really important, not community in a family, right? Business is business. We might think that we're family, we're not family, but community is a different story. Community means coming together over shared experiences, whether that's food or extracurricular activities. And so there's this push within buildings or within tenants in those buildings to create these community experiences, sometimes led by social media accounts, but all of it anchored within technology, within a friendly tenant-facing user interface that can capture their entire day. So we're talking about signing into your building using a QR code that you have on your phone. It means signing up for a yoga class that's on the rooftop of your building through the app after lunch. It means following along all the different events that are being offered by either your employer or by the building in general. And so to answer your question directly, how do we create more of a friendly hybrid environment? You need more than just office space to get people to come back to the office. It's very hard to mandate that they return to the office. They want to be willing to do so. And so trying to replicate that sense of community, all accelerated by the underlying technology, is important. And I just want to add one final note. The technology alone is not going to make this happen. The technology is the oil on the gears that allows it to operate properly. And so you have a choice between pouring sand in the machine or oil in the machine. Technology should be that oil, although not always.
Sorry. Iain, do you want to go for it or should I go?
One of you, you two, Simon, let's go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, let's go for it. So no, I definitely agree with what Gabe mentioned, that technology is an enabler, but it's definitely not where all of the core thing is, where it comes to the services we offer as well as the amenities, understanding, and this is where getting closer to that customer and understanding what they actually need is going to be key. And to definitely echo what Gabe mentioned, creating communities, vertical communities within your buildings, helping the customer with their own communities throughout different assets. And then finally, how can you also create communities in the neighborhood? So I think, Gabe, you mentioned, the marketplace. How can you maybe connect the small businesses down the street to the actual marketplace of a building in order to create this kind of more cohesive community within a neighborhood? And I think by actually seeing all those different things, that could be great on the community side. Obviously, the energy management and being able to show the tenants on the energy score is quite important in order for those tenants to understand, like, compared to the other guys in the buildings, where do I stand and where I can actually get better? And I think what's very important is to, on the one side, having the infrastructure to allow the tenants to easily integrate whatever they would like to do, integrate on their end.
So Iain, yeah, you can go now, Iain.
Yes, if I may. There we go. To be honest, I think, Gabe, I think that's a very good one, and Simon. But on the short term, I would even say that technology, and of course, this is preaching for the converted a bit, is more than simply the oil. I think the technology in the short term even should be the engine in really being able to connect the different services, to be able to facilitate the vertical setup and creating a vertical workplace, connecting everyone, but also getting the end user insights really to be able to then move away of being the engine, because in the end it should be the people, it should be the building, it should be everything working together. But on the short term, I sincerely see technology being the real engine to facilitate this, because what we're seeing is that a lot of what we understand in the real estate is not really the end user. It's the building, it's managing the building, it's square meters, not users. And really getting more and more out of that mindset and really understanding from a property management, from a landlord perspective. And of course, what's driving this all is the tenants themselves. The likes in our case, we work on both sides, landlords and tenants, and they're looking for us to start this horizontal and vertical integration. Give me my bit, which is mine for Shell, for example, but I also want to be integrated in the services and the mobility that my landlord offers, because otherwise we have to start jumping for different apps or different environments. And at the same time, that gives the real motor of understanding what's being used and how it's being experienced from an end user point of view for the property manager landlord. And in the next step with developers to be able to really build the next generation to make sure that tenants are optimally, not perfectly, I think that's difficult, but optimally happy.
Iain, do you find that, oh, I've got an echo now too, but do you find that there might be a little bit of a different approach to that idea based on the size of the tenant? So if you have, let's say, half a building size tenant versus maybe a smaller user, is the expectation different in that regard from the tenant perspective?
So, I myself, and I don't hear you with the question, but now, well, at the moment, yes, but it also depends. And it's starting to move quite quickly. Like now, we as Office App are a smaller tenant we have 1 floor out of 5 floors in the middle of Amsterdam as one of our offices. But we're now, of course, but more and more are we want to integrate our own meeting rooms and our own desks into one environment of what the landlord is offering. And we're a small player, but of course this would be our own technology. But you see more and more companies expecting that as well. I think the trend really is moving quite quickly, accelerated by COVID, towards tooling that is more B2C than B2B, and really looking at this integrated approach. And at the moment, definitely, Gabe, there is a difference between the anchor tenant and the demands there versus the smaller tenants, but we do see that catching up.
Milos, how do you see that? What kind of technologies do you implement as MiddleCap, and what kind of technologies do the tenants need to bring themselves?
Well, this is an important question for companies like us, for developers, because it's always about the efficient spend of resources. So we needed to draw a line, what should be part of the shell and core construction and which should be left for tenants, let's call it like that. So we all have agreed that everything which is part of the healthy environment should be part of the shell and core infrastructure, meaning that all the sensors which measure the outside and inside air quality, the interaction with the building itself, meaning using just the app for changing the temperature, not to play with thermostats and so on and so on. This should be part of the shell and core, together with the information or technology used for insights into the occupancy of the building, because these are the information which we need for efficient running of the building itself. Yep. And we should be able to provide the tenants the ability to connect virtually everything on top of the, let's say, basic backbone which we put into the building, meaning that if they decide to go for people counting technologies, for example, something more advanced, they will be able to do it on our own infrastructure, not to put like a separate or parallel infrastructure just for themselves. So like opening up this backbone and letting them the ability to implement whatever they want on top of it. So that's first part, the infrastructure part. And the second part, I will just continue on what my colleagues just said. It's the community building, and since we cooperate with Office App, we see this in action. So one of the requirements which we had was the ability of such an app or tenant engagement platform to connect to the backbone which you have in the building itself, because this is what brings the added value for the customer, and we were able to do it together. So now we can connect the people communities together with the building operations, and so on. So this is the way how we would like to put it also in the future. And maybe one comment on what was just said by all three colleagues here is that we used to talk about the space at least in three different points of view, I would say. First is the standard office, the rented office, then some kind of managed office environment, and then some kind of co-working, let's say, attitude. And I think that at least the standard office and the managed office points of view will merge in the future, because all the tenants will ask for services which will be delivered by technologies which we all talk about. So it's not only about renting the space and paying the rent, but it's more about what services do we get from the building. So I think this border between managed office and standard office will disappear in the near future.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting in our market in New York, because Milos, you just mentioned that. So the market as a whole is a horrible market right now. Historically high availability rates, historically low transaction activity, although it's clear that corner has turned. But there are some pockets of really strong activity, and one of those pockets is on managed space, flexible space alternatives above a certain size for companies that are paying premium, significant premium, sometimes 2 times what market rent would be. And the reason why they're doing that is they had intended to return to the office Q1 of 2022. They're now waking up and realizing that it has to happen in Q2 of 21, and they don't have the time, the energy, or the options, let alone all the backlog from the shutdown with the Department of Buildings to construct their spaces. And so ironically, we're seeing WeWork being one of the strongest performers right now in the market, signing $100+ rents because of that reason exactly. And I do think we'll see an increasing amount of that in the US.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. So my next question is, and it goes a little bit to what Milos said as well. So we have the technology we have implemented within those buildings. Well, tenants needs to bring in a couple of things maybe. But what are those needs that those customers expect? Also in Manhattan, they go to those places, but what do they really expect now to be there? Simon?
Sure. So on our end at Hines, what we're seeing is that, again, one aspect is everything around remote access control. They don't expect to touch all those high touch points anymore. So this is where everything connecting elevators, parking doors, and any other things alongside remote booking of spaces. I think maybe it started in co-working like WeWork, but this is basically really present in a lot of our assets as a service. Another point would be around well-being. I guess, where when I was talking about, we need to understand that everything around health, especially with COVID, is tackled all the way from energy and those HVAC monitoring to all those new types of materials that could maybe auto-clean themselves. I think this is quite important. And maybe going back to the community aspect, I think this is something that as the client come in, obviously their workforce being scattered more than ever. How can we help as a landlord to help those clients improve their whole community within in order to increase their productivity at the end of the day? So that's a few of the points that we're seeing into the expectations.
And what has been the impact of this pandemic on to optimize workplaces for tenants, and how do we move forward? What have you seen happening, Iain, the last couple of months?
So in our case, really, it's being pushed a lot by tenants. We don't call them tenants, we call them corporates, a slightly different word. And because they indeed, as you say, Simon, they need to bring their workforce back, but the workforce only wants to come back when it's trustworthy and safe on the one hand, and they need to have that clear feeling, and when it actually makes sense, meaning when it's the right moment for collaboration with their colleagues. Yeah. So we see those two elements coming back a lot. But also, and I touched on it just briefly just now, is the mobility part. A lot of e-bikes, parking, public transport information. Of course, again, makes sense because you want to know where to go safely, not too many people around, etc. And we see a lot of requests, RFPs coming around that, and mostly at the moment pushed by corporates, by tenants, and slowly now, at least in Europe, really landlords coming into the picture, and really the more forward-looking ones, like Hines, Blackstone, LaSalle, in bringing back this feeling to their tenants to return to work safely. So that's really what we're seeing at the moment.
But landlords can have a massive impact, I guess, when they do the right thing right now, and they really can create that office space that people really want to be, and tenants really want to be. You can have a major impact on the future of offices, or not?
I definitely agree, and I think this is where originally the whole connection between landlords and clients used to be very transactional. So by default, maybe the tenants or the clients would not really see landlord as really caring as much in the past. And what we're definitely seeing is that, and this is what we're trying to do with Hines for sure, is how can we be even more than simply a space provider or a space maker? How can we become literally here as a business partner to the client to actually achieve whatever goals they have, on the ESG side, but also on the productivity side. And I think this is where the industry is heading, is, landlord as business partner, real business partners.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. I love the focus on services and getting that. Can we learn anything from some of the case studies we're seeing right now? And can we think maybe quite wildly for a second? Are we going to stop renting on square feet or square meters and actually start renting on services in the future?
So I think it's an interesting question. The short answer is probably not. But what we might see is a little bit more of an a la carte menu. And so we are starting to see a degree of that. The reason why playing around, at least in the US, with the rent structure is because there's a lot of different components, lenders, partners, where if you mess around with that price per square foot, you start to get into tricky territory. But what we started to see even pre-pandemic were certain smart landlords that were offering to furnish, wire, and yes, build the space for tenants. And here in New York, the landlords will sometimes fully turnkey the space for you, but never furnish and wiring the space. They're willing to do that now for an added cost per square foot that they amortize over the term. We'll see more of that as tenants want to focus on their core business, not actually building their space out. So that's just one concrete example. But I do think we'll start to see more of an airline model where you pay for your basic seat and then you could pay above that.
Oh, I hate those models. I always think I got a good deal, and then I find out I didn't. All right. Anyone else? Do you guys agree? Do you guys argue that a little bit? Where's the future going?
I will definitely agree with what Gabe is saying, and I definitely see the airline model coming, within the real estate. I think we can learn a lot from outside the real estate industry as per se, and I think this is where a lot of the innovation is going to come in, whether it's a business model, whether it's technology, or simply the way we approach our tenants in general. I think learning from outside the industry is going to be very rich and enrichful for us.
Amazing. Wow.
Milos.
Thanks, guys. Yeah.
Milos wants to say something,
Oh,
I
good.
guess, or not? Yeah.
Well, I overheard a really interesting sentence about the shift, which probably we'll see, and it was during a discussion about the timber buildings, and the question was, will it somehow influence the companies which take their buildings as or their headquarters as a statement? I mean, like, when you have lots of marble in the lobby, it's kind of a statement, and how does the timber influence this? And the interesting answer was that, well, still the headquarters of the company shall be a statement, but the idea of that statement or the statement itself will change. So now the statement won't be the marble, but it will be the ESG factors. It will be the services around it. So these core statements of the real estate are shifting to something which I'm really eager to see in coming months and years.
I love that. Amazing. Well, I think that was really well said. You guys always exceed my expectations. Thank you so much for being here today. And yeah, till next time. And Gabe, yeah, do some commercial work. Yeah, I'm convinced. Thanks, guys. Really amazing answers. We'll talk to you next time.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. It was great.
Enjoy your day.